Welcome to Portals of Perception. We are delighted you have found us. You can join the Portals of Perception network on the site by subscribing and becoming a member. And you can attend one of our events. You can like us in all media channels, and you're welcome to share our posts with others. Become part of a global network that explores all sorts of fascinating questions at this time. Thank you. Welcome to Portals of Perception, where we inquire what is emerging at the development frontiers of the human experience. Today, as part of our conversations with next generation leaders, we are exploring leadership as a personal journey. I'm here with Fionn Wright. Fionn travels the world with his family while schooling his kids while coaching leaders and entrepreneurs. He brings an integration of deep inquiry into the evolution of our planetary consciousness, together with pragmatic portfolio of capabilities and skills in guiding CEOs and leaders to help them achieve their results and their aspirations. Fionn lives in Shanghai, and he brings this integrated approach to his TV appearances, writing, consulting, facilitating, podcasting, and live streaming. Fionn, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Aviv.
Well, with the introduction that I gave, how would you describe your core interest, your core inquiry that propels your journey?
There's been many throughout the years, and it seems to be an evolving process. I do notice that I go through phases. There's certain phases where I'll lock onto a topic and I'll get really deep into it, and leadership certainly being one of those topics. What leadership means, how we put it in different contexts. China is another one of my passions. Education is another one of my passions. Consciousness itself, another passion. Really, I have an orientation towards the leading edge of things. So, that could be technology, emerging technologies, and how they combine with consciousness and leadership, and how do we begin to integrate all these fields together. So anything that's on the leading edge might pique my interest. It could even be, the topic of cryptocurrencies, or now we have NFTs, or, there's things that are popping out on planet Earth right now that are new expressions of humanity. And one of my passions is really in exploring what's on the leading edge. And one of the areas that I've found that seems to tie a lot of this together is the topic of development, human development, which ties in quite well to consciousness. And through the conscious lens of being human, right? All that we perceive is through our conscious awareness. So how do we make meaning of everything that's happening around us? And that then expands beyond the individual out into the collectives that we operate in, right? And being a global species now, there's many different forms of collectives out there. And so part of what I'm fascinated by, having grown up around the world, originally Irish, grew up in Africa, university in Canada, spent most of my adult life in China, now again, kind of traveling around the world. There's a lot of different perspectives and value systems, belief systems that I've lived, worked in. And I find that seems to be relatively rare. Right? Not a lot of people seem to have that embodied experience in that variety of global contexts. And so sometimes I seem to be speaking from my African self. Sometimes I'm speaking from my European Irish self. Sometimes I'm speaking from my Chinese self. Sometimes I'm speaking from my North American Canadian self. And yet at the same time, there's this kind of integration and unification of who am I as an individual, who am I as a human being. And my work has led more and more, most recently, to this concept of both unity and diversity. And how do we have both? right? We live on a planet right now where we could see the benefit of, more unity, whether that's in living in peaceful times or coming together to work on collaborating projects. And yet at the same time, how do we honor and respect and hold space for the wide diversity that exists and is unfolding on our planet right now? And that interplay between unity, diversity, how do we come into play with both of those? And how do we support both of those to unfold and to manifest out into our world? And so a lot of my work will kind of fall somewhere in the realm of the interplay between those two.
So I think you just shared with us the delicious menu we're going to explore over the next 90 minutes. We want to explore the world citizenship experience that you have developed. We want to trace within that the inquiry into development and consciousness. And we certainly want to then sense this idea of unity and diversity. I think that I'd like us to stay first with the initial theme that surfaced, which is your desire, sense, intuition, way of, as I describe it, skating to the edge. And let me ask you this: when and where and how do you trace that impulse in you? At what point do you recognize your inclination to sense to the frontier of what's emerging now? Question one. And question two, what is it you have discovered about coming into contact with what is emergent right here, right now? And as you said, this may be in economical or in financial, in crypto or in any other space, but I hear the underlying attunement to what is newly emerging and transforming. And I'm curious if you can source that impulse in you. Where is it coming from, and what is it instructing and inspiring in you today?
Well, where it comes from, I mean, we can make meaning of that question in different ways. In some ways, I think since I was very young, I've always been curious. I was one of those kids who loved school. I loved going to school and learning new information. And there were specific areas, topics that interested me more than others. I tend to have an orientation towards the future instead of the past. So history doesn't seem to interest me very much, but, thinking about future trends and what's emerging, and sci-fi. I've always been a huge sci-fi fan. So reading Isaac Asimov as a teenager and imagining different worlds and how we're going to evolve as a species. And so there has been this orientation forwards. And so it's this imagining, this seeing what is already here and what is right on the frontier, and what's that little bit further ahead that we can begin to imagine, and also beyond just imagining, start to bring into reality. Because there's this question of, as conscious human beings, we have this power to create, right? To take the materials, the matter, the thoughts, the emotions, the awareness that we have, and to mold things into being, right? From iPhone that I have, to this Zoom conversation that we're on, they didn't exist before they became an idea in someone's head, and then they took that idea and they made it into something. And so from that perspective, since I was young, I've always been fascinated by, what is it that's never been done before? And how can we find ways of bringing entirely new forms into being? I probably would have used different types of language when I was younger to describe that. But that has been a core energy in me, is to look at what doesn't exist and what would be useful to exist, and how do we go about bringing that into existence. So I probably started younger on in my journey, kind of two-pronged. One was into the art space. I was fascinated by expressing oneself, like the way the great artists from Picasso to Dali to Da Vinci have been able to express human perception in a way that no one has before, at least in the history of our species. And combining that then with another kind of prong, which is, I've always been fascinated by mathematics and geometry and physics and the structure of the universe, whether we go down all the way to the quantum or we go up all the way to, we go out to expand out to the universe or maybe beyond. And so the combination of those two, the artistic expression with the understanding of the construction of the universe, and the combination of those two, it opens up a space for, physics exists in a very physical space, let's say, right? We measure, we map out, we deconstruct the universe around us. And art exists in a very non-prescribed space. There is no frame around art. You can come up with something entirely new, and who is anyone else to say that that's not art? And so how do we play between these two? And so as I grew, one of the spaces that I found that was useful to explore the areas that I wanted to explore was entrepreneurship, was being able to go out into the world and to create something entirely new without any real oversight as to what it is that I'm creating. Entrepreneurship is a vehicle for experimentation in the world to see what sticks and what doesn't. And the universe, the world, lets us know what it needs, what it wants. We create a business, and if it doesn't work or people don't buy it, then we get some sort of feedback that says, okay, world's not ready for that yet, or maybe that's not something the world is interested in. Let's try something else. And so that was where, I found a middle space between those two, right? I don't really want to become a scientist. I don't really want to become a fully fledged artist. I love all those spaces, but somewhere in the middle is like this entrepreneurial space where I can take bits of different parts of different worlds and I can combine them together into new vehicles. And those then I can put out into the world and get feedback on them. And so I found that useful in my life as a form of being at the leading edge, is finding other people around the world who are doing cool things. It could be in any field, and saying, how do we take that thing that you're doing, and how do we find a way to bring that into the world and see if that's something that the world actually wants. And as I've grown, I think I've also developed a bit more of an orientation towards that which is beneficial to humanity or to the unfolding of consciousness. How do we help support humanity to come out into the world in a more full, a more healthy way? And so, like I was talking about at the beginning, I had this orientation towards the future, but that's in recent years started to spread out backwards a little bit in order for me to understand how we have come to be. So I'm not so interested in history, as in like stories about the past, but I am interested in how we have developed as a conscious species. So how have we evolved? What are the different forms of collective trauma, for example, that exist on planet Earth, right? From slavery to colonialism to these different economic crises that we've been through, to now COVID, as an example of on this planet that are embodied within us. And if we are to continue unfolding forwards as conscious beings, which I would like to hope that we can continue doing and don't drive ourselves extinct, how do we create conditions to make that more likely? How do we support creating a kind of environment, an ecosystem on planet Earth that nurtures the continued unfolding of humanity in a healthy way? Because in many ways right now, we don't seem to be doing it in a very healthy way. We're driving mass extinction. We've got global warming. There's all different areas in which we are unsustainable. And how do we move towards regeneration or building restorative ecosystems? And a lot of that seems to continue to come back to the self, and how we operate as individuals, and how conscious or how self-aware am I of the actions, of the words, of even just the ways in which I'm being. And that's where my work, circle long way around, comes back to leadership and coaching and working with individuals to support them on their personal journey through life, to make meaning of this reality that we find ourselves in, and to find a pathway that is unique to us, but it fits within the grander niche of humanity in support of a healthy unfolding of all of us.
So in that middle space that you describe between the scientific inclination, the search for truth, the search for what is, and the artistic inclination, the search to express unmanifested beauty and new combination or composition of colors or themes or poetry or anything. You said that third space, and you framed it as entrepreneurship. And the entrepreneur life led you back inside to the developmental impulse, if I hear that correctly. Because in all of these, there is the exterior and the interior dimension, and they continue to inform each other. And so I want to stay with this just a little longer, and we will get to the civilizational crisis on the table and how that leads us back into ourselves. But so if you were to narrate your own story in your own head, in your own voice, in terms of the discovery of that feedback loop between you and you're making new entrepreneurial attempt, you get the feedback from the world, and then it loops inside you also to your own discovery of who am I as a conscious being. Give me some more narrative on both what it is you're doing over the last 10 years in those exterior discoveries, attempts, adventures, and some of the discoveries that you're making on the inside in terms of who am I and how am I to be inside all that I'm doing.
Yeah, well, that feedback loop, we do not exist without our environment, right? We are beings that are autopoetic. So there's this aspect of I influence the environment around me, and then the environment around me changes and it influences me. So this feedback loop is constantly happening. And I started off, I grew up in a family business, so I got to see my dad from a young age. Well, he was originally a diplomat, and as I was going through school, he started setting up his businesses and all that. So I got to watch him go from that whole, having a job to moving into entrepreneurship. And that always fascinated me to see the edge of that. Like, what does it mean to have the freedom to be able to choose how you work, when you work, the way in which you work, and to choose the kind of things that you want to work on. And through life, there's been different forms of expression that have wanted to come out of me through the vehicle of entrepreneurship. When I was younger, it was much more about obviously building a business that can scale, or building a business that can have some sort of a impact on the innovative space, right? How can I create something that's completely new that has never been done before? And over time, I became less interested in scaling and less interested in just creating a new technology or something like that. And it moved more towards impact from the perspective of helping people, supporting people, creating better conditions for us all. And so, different forms of businesses. So I started off more in kind of the tech and supporting other businesses to grow that space. And some of those businesses did okay. Some of those businesses failed completely, and that was part of the learning journey. But over time, another thing that I realized about myself is that I have this kind of introvert type quality to me where I don't seem to enjoy spending a lot of time with a lot of people. So being in a big team kind of exhausts me. I don't seem to enjoy managing people. I love working with people, but I don't seem to enjoy having to like supervise or, you know, build a big team and then have to check to see what everyone's doing. I prefer to build something, and if there's other people out there that are interested in a similar sort of thing that I'm interested in, let's build it together. And then maybe, you know, maybe it will scale, maybe it won't, but that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to bring something out into the world that is actually useful. And so these days, I'm picking up new projects all the time, and it's less clear now, the boundary, right? Before it was like, am I setting up a business? Am I not setting up a business? Now it's like, well, you know, you and I are having this conversation now, and this might develop into something, right? Where we decide, oh, well, let's have more of these conversations, right? Or it might turn out that, you know, we introduce each other to someone else, and that opens up a new project space. And I feel like the world is moving so fast now that the original concept of business versus not business, right? Or job versus not job, right? We got the gig economy now, where you can pick up a job that might last 2 days, right? And so how do we come to terms with that? How do we understand the speed at which the world around us is moving? And I think that that's one of the areas that a lot of people are struggling with at the moment, is wanting a form of stability, or you know, like, make America great again, right? Like, let's go back to something that was clear and understandable and had ways that I could grapple with it. And now it's like, well, the world doesn't really work like that anymore. The world is evolving faster and faster. We have emerging exponential technologies that are changing the way that we do everything, right? We have AI that's coming out and making previous jobs obsolete, right? Because now the AI can do it. How do we adapt to that? How do we deal with that?